in this video we're going to have a look at loops and how we can get the same code to run more than once. So let's have a look at the simple command. The first thing I'm going to do is move away from the immediate mode and open up a new file. So go to File, New File, and there's where my program is going to be written, and that's the program window, so that's the output window. And what I'm going to do is we're going to create a times table. So one way, let's say I wanted to do the 6 times table. Well, we know that I could quite simply do print and then open brackets. I could do speech marks 6 times 7. In fact, let's use the X symbol just to represent 7 equals, and then I could type the answer, but that's really boring. So what I could do instead is do comma 6 star 7, close brackets. And hopefully if I go run and run module and in the active window, or it'll ask me to save it, of course it will. So let's call it multiplication. Can't spell multiplication. There we go. 6 times 7 equals 42. Now that's fine. So let's say I wanted the 1 times table. So sorry, the 7 times table starting at 1. So there's 1 times 7. So I'd need to change this and make sure that that says 1. And then, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll save myself some time and I'll copy this. I'll go to the end and I'll press enter and I'll paste it, and I always change these numbers. And I'm already bored doing this. This is just not fun. I'm going to do this again to get the 3, and just, what's the point? I'm just repeating the same line over and over again. Now, okay, that's going to work. If I run it, I can see it's going to ask me to save. On the one side, I can see that it's working. But what I could do is introduce a new idea. If I'm going to run the same line of code with a slight change each time, then I could quite easily use a loop. A loop is a piece of code that runs the same line more than once. So let's have a look at the basic loop in Python. I'm going to get rid of those lines. We're going to come back to the multiplication one in a second. The basic concept, the basic loop that we're going to look at is called the for loop. And I'm going to say for, and I need a variable that's going to store our counter value, and I'm going to call it, for the hell of it, counter. There you go. For counter in range, and then we're going to get this to count from 1 to 10. Now that's going to look a bit weird to anyone who's never seen programming before, but quite simply, it says for every instance of the variable counter, starting at 1, I want you to start at 1, I want you to count to 10. So range is the range of values we're looking at. Start at 1, go to 10, increase by 1 each time. So if I said to you, count from 1 to 10, you'd go 1, 2, 3, so on. This is all the program's being asked to do. It's asking to count from 1 to 10 and store the value it's currently at in the variable counter. And that's all right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tell this to simply print hello, and I'll put the n in to force this onto a new line. There you go. And then I'm going to run that. It's going to ask me to save, and then, oh, I've done something very wrong. Now, one of the problems with all of these is if an instruction in Python needs to have following lines. So the for loop is going to run other lines of code. Then you must remember that at the end of that line, you need to put a colon. It is incredibly common not to remember to put the colon. Putting the colon says, after this, everything that is indented, now that's this thing here, this gap, it's indented. Everything that is indented, run while I'm counting this. Now I've only got 1 line indented, that's fine. But the indent in Python, unlike virtually any other programming language, the indentation, this pushing in of the line, is vitally important to get it right. Python won't work otherwise if you don't put that, or the command won't work the way you think it's going to work. So let's have a look. Run that again. Save the code, and look at that. It writes hello, and it's written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh no, there's only 9. Well, that makes sense because it started at 1, and when it got round to the 10th one, it got to 10 and went, oh, finished. If I wanted 10 hellos, I need to ensure that I either start 1 back at 0 or, more accordingly, tell it to end at 11, not 111 at 11. That will give me 10 hellos because that's how many times it will run through the loop. That's quite interesting. What about a times table? Well, let's say I wanted to do the 7 times table and I want to do 1 to 12. Well, we've already seen that I need to say 13 then. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in here counter, and I'm going to run this just to see what happens if I look at the value that we're storing. So again, in this case, print counter is just going to print whatever that variable is storing at that precise moment in time. And there we go, 1 to 12. So the first time it encounters this line here, it sets up counter to 1 and it runs this line here, which outputs 1 there. It will go back to the 4. It will now move it up and say, have I reached the end number? No, I haven't. So counter is now made to be 2. This tells it to print counter, and then we get 2. Then it will loop back around. It will increase this, say, have I reached the last number? No, counter is 3, print counter, 3 appears, and so on and so forth, till it gets to 12. Prints 12, gets around to counter, increases it by 1, says, have I reached the last number? Yes, counter is now 13, so drop out of the code, nothing left, stop running. So we've got our numbers 1 to 12. Well, that's good, because what I could do now is put a times 7 equals speech marks, comma, and then why don't I just do counter times by 7. So I'm using the variable value twice, once initially right at the front just to put the number up, and another time to say, well, use that number and times it by 7. Let's see what happens. And look at that, 1 times 7 is 7, 2 times 7, oh good. I don't have to actually calculate where we're going with that. So I can use a loop to do the same instruction. That's the same thing I did right at the beginning, but I don't have to write each line. I can get the computer to generate each line. I hope that has helped.